pioneering cultural anthropologist and author Zora Neale Hurston in the characteristics of Negro expression. Juke is the word for a Negro pleasure house. It may mean a bawdy house. It may mean the house set apart on public works where the men and women dance, drink, and gamble. Often, it is a combination of all these. The word juke itself has a debated origin, with some saying it comes from the Juba dance, a style of dance brought from the Congo by enslaved people in Charleston, South Carolina. Others attribute it to the Gullah Geechee word juke, meaning infamous or disorderly, an evolution of the Wolof word jug, meaning disorderly. Juke places have been around in some form or another since slavery, when enslaved people would leave plantations with or without permission to secretive parties in the woods. As blues music gained popularity in the Jim Crow South, event spaces popped up in shacks, sheds, and old barns. Many were allowed to operate on the land of white sharecroppers who owned the labor, homes, profits, and debt of the black people who lived there. Juke joints would have odd and inconsistent hours, often reliant on the schedules of traveling musical acts or the people who owned them. They also thrived on relative secrecy, meaning people who came to juke joints usually knew everybody else. These spaces often catered to the working class black laborers from work camps, turpentine, or sawmill camps, as well as sharecroppers. A lot of the food served at these places was usually cooked outside, very informally, due to the lack of kitchens, making fried fish and barbecue popular choices. Jukes featured a bunch of dancing that was usually considered obscene and lewd, my favorite kind of dancing, involving close touching, hugging, and grinding. This includes the slow drag, which scandalized white critics when it was later introduced on stage in a 1929 Broadway production. Do you know how turned I would personally be doing the slow drag when Bessie Smith's Empty Bed Blues came on? That song sadly doesn't come into public domain until next year, but here's one of the lyrics. He's a deep sea diver with a stroke that can't go wrong. And if you need to know what deep sea diver means, be sure to check out A History of Oral Sex. In the early 1900s, when juke joints officially entered the radar, they quickly acquired negative reputations as places for sex work, gambling, violence, and murder. Because of the privacy bubble of these spaces, as well as the misogyny of the era, it could get ugly. Recalled one juke joint attendee of the 1960s, if you stayed there till about 10 o'clock and didn't nothing happen, you better go on home. Cause from about 11 o'clock on, there's gonna be some shooting going on. Some guy's gonna whoop his old lady about dancing with somebody. Some proprietors took extra measures to keep their clientele safe, with one juke joint out near Lakeland, Florida, informing customers that anyone shooting a gun in these quarters will be charged $5 and required to forfeit the gun or to go to jail. Some jukes didn't allow women, and others cut off people who got too drunk. Because many were operating in dry states or counties, they paid off local law enforcement to look the other way from the free-flowing liquor. As the years wore on, some spaces got juke organs, allowing customers to slide in a nickel to strike up a phonograph. And by the way, there were white juke joints too, though they were often referred to as honky-tonks and roadhouses.
Roadhouse.
But in the first half of the century in the Mississippi Delta, the area with the highest proportion of black Americans and the birthplace of blues and rock and roll, juke joints were especially sacred. Another important area of juke joint activity was in Florida. The state would lead the nation in lynchings per capita between 1882 and 1930. Surrounded by sundown towns with dangerous curfews, the only places for a private and safe outing for many black people were often juke joints. Take this 1941 photograph of the Pines juke joint out in Belle Glade, Florida. In Marigold, Mississippi, sometime between 1954 and 1961, William Seaberry, a teenage sharecropper, and his older brother began operating Po Monkey's Juke Joint out of a former sharecropper shack made of tin and plywood, held together with nails, staples, and wires on Hyder Farm. Seaberry, who was known as Monkey, moved into the shack in 1963 and eventually added a pool room, stage area, kitchen, and bedroom. Locals relied on word of mouth to know when Monkey would be opening the doors, as Po Monkey's was never listed in any directory, yellow pages, map, or other official guide. If you found the location and saw a string of Christmas lights turned on, you knew the juke was open for business that night. Po Monkey's Juke became legendary, and in the 90s it was attracting college students from Delta State University who wanted to experience an authentic juke with blues music. In the 1990s, college students and blues enthusiasts became a central component of juke joint clientele because of the legalization of riverboat casinos and gambling in Mississippi. The first one opened in 1992. Other juke joints had similar nights of college and middle-class patrons who'd pay around $5 for the authentic juke experience. A photojournalist who interviewed juke joint owners in 2000 found that many were losing customers and charging more. Riverboat casinos lured away customers with free food, music, and drinks. Juke joints just couldn't compete. In the 2000s, Po Monkeys was no longer open on weekends because of the wealth of nightlife options, but it still opened its doors on Thursdays for mostly middle-aged black men and women, and Mondays for a rowdier crowd featuring, like many juke joints desperate for customers, tease shows. Reported the New York Times, on Mondays, the strippers make the 2-hour drive from Memphis to work a raunchier crowd for tips. Po Monkeys had a few rules though, including no loud music, no dope smoking, and no rap music. Monkey himself outlawed baggy pants and was known to change into different colored suits whenever the joint was open. Described Southern spaces. In his lounge, he favors bright, color-coordinated suits with matching belt buckles, derby or cowboy hats, and boots. If he's feeling up to it, he changes clothing in his bedroom every hour or so and emerges, strutting as if on a fashion show runway in baby blue, bright white, crimson, yellow, plaid, or even highly reflective silver. Po Monkeys held lively functions until 2016 when Willie Monkey Seaberry died at the age of 75. For most of his ownership of the juke, he still worked as a farmer. Very rarely were juke joints financially lucrative. Instead, they were communal nightlife options for people with no other options. There are a few exceptions, however. About 115 miles south of the Mississippi Highway 61 crossroads, where urban legend says blues artist Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil for the ability to play music, is one of the oldest branded jukes, the Blue Front Cafe, which opened in 1948 under a Bentonia couple named Carrie and Mary Holmes, who owned 80 acres of farmland right in the heart of the Mississippi blues movement. The cinder block building became a prized piece of blues history, serving up buffalo fish and bootleg moonshine whiskey and deviled eggs to local workers from the Yazoo County cotton fields. Per the Mississippi Blues Trail database, the Blue Front was subject to a 10 p.m. town curfew, but at the height of cotton gathering and ginning season, the cafe might stay open 24 hours a day to serve shifts of workers around the clock. This shows the importance of juke joints to the local economies that exploited black labor. Where else were underpaid and overworked laborers going to go to blow off steam? The money generated from the Blue Front Cafe, which sold groceries and did haircuts in addition to hosting events with live blues music and serving hot meals, generated enough money for the family to raise 10 children and 3 nephews on, who also worked the 80 acres of farmland. Still, Jimmy Duck Holmes was warned by his parents when he took over the business in 1970. My mama sat me down and told me, "Boy, there will come a time when you think you'll get rich at the Blue Front, but that ain't guaranteed. This place has its ups and downs." Musicians would show up, perform without a stage, with a chair and a tip bucket. The Blue Front Cafe has stayed in the family ever since. Currently owned by Grammy Award nominated Jimmy Duck Holmes, a blues singer, and has received a historical marker from Mississippi. A 2017 article mentioned the little building receiving blues pilgrims from Australia, the United Kingdom, California, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Said Holmes, "A family from London was here yesterday. A husband, a wife, and 2 kids. The kid could play a little bit, so he got back there and messed around. They were delighted." Blue Front Cafe also hosts an annual Bentonia Blues Festival, which has had live music since 1973. While there are several jukes that achieved fame, like Po Monkeys and the Blue Front Cafe, many were undocumented, inconsistently operated, and have thus faded into obscurity. These important secular spaces of joy and self-expression served as relief from racism, poverty, and reality.